The North Atlantic, January 1943. The sea was black, endless, and cruelly cold. Waves broke like steel against the hulls of grey ships crawling east toward Britain. Above them, the winter wind screamed through rigging and cables. Below the surface, German U-boats waited in the deep like wolves. Their commanders, veterans of years of commerce raiding, watched through periscopes as the convoys appeared over the horizon. In the beginning it was easy. Tankers, freighters, troopships, all slow, fragile targets. But by early 1943 something had changed. The ocean lanes were filling with a new breed of vessel, hundreds of them, all built in America, all nearly identical. And no matter how many were sunk, hundreds more seemed to appear. In the conning tower of U-553, Kapitän Leutnant Karl Thurman peered through his binoculars at a massive convoy. 30 ships in tight formation, escorted by destroyers, their plumes of smoke merging into one long scar across the grey horizon. His radio man whispered, "Intercept message from BDU, priority target Liberty ships." Thurman frowned. Everyone had heard of them now. The Liberty class. Ugly, square, slow freighters that appeared to sprout like mushrooms after rain. They weren't fast, but they were endless. For every one sunk, 10 more left American ports. It defied logic, and it terrified the Kriegsmarine. The first time a Liberty ship entered the war, it seemed like a joke. The Germans called it the Ugly Duckling. The Allies called it the ship that wouldn't wait. Designed by a British engineer, Sir Owen L. Lewis, and perfected by American industrial genius Henry J. Kaiser, the Liberty ship was built on a single principle: speed of production. It was not a masterpiece of naval elegance, it was a triumph of manufacturing will. Kaiser's shipyards tore apart the old shipbuilding rulebook. No more years of hand riveting and wooden scaffolding. Instead, they used modular sections, prefabricated steel plates, and welding instead of rivets. Workers who had never seen the sea before were turning out ocean-going vessels. The numbers were staggering. By 1943, America was launching 3 Liberty ships every day. A complete ship, 441 feet long, displacing 14,000 tons fully loaded, could be built in as little as 42 days. One, the Robert E. Peary, was famously completed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 30 minutes, an industrial miracle broadcast over national radio. The U-boat commanders couldn't believe the reports. To them, such production was impossible. Germany's most advanced Type 7 submarines took months to build, requiring skilled labor and precision tools. But in the United States, thousands of anonymous workers, men and women, many untrained, were turning out ships by sheer force of organization. Kaiser's shipyards in Richmond, California, became the beating heart of that effort. 24 hours a day, sparks flew from welding torches as hull sections were joined together like puzzle pieces. Women riveters worked beside dockside cranes and diesel hammers, their overalls streaked with soot and salt. They were called Kaiser's miracle workers. A single shipyard could employ more than 90,000 people. It wasn't art, it was assembly. Engineers from Ford and General Motors had redesigned the process like an automotive line, breaking construction into 250 prefabricated units that could be bolted and welded anywhere. America had turned war into mass production. In Berlin, naval intelligence officers pored over reconnaissance photos showing shipyards stretching for miles along American coasts. The sheer scale of them made seasoned admirals fall silent. Germany could not even imagine matching that output. Each Liberty ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo, enough fuel, munitions, or food to supply an entire division for days. Sinking one no longer meant victory. By the time a U-boat captain radioed his kill, the replacement was already steaming out of Chesapeake Bay. Out at sea, the men of the Kriegsmarine began to feel the shift. The ocean, once their hunting ground, was now becoming a battlefield they could no longer dominate. Convoys escorted by Liberty ships were thicker, more coordinated, and harder to destroy. The ships themselves, though crude, could take damage and keep afloat. Their hulls were welded steel, not riveted, which meant fewer catastrophic breaches. Even when torpedoed, many stayed afloat long enough for rescue or repair. German captains began calling them ghost ships. They would sink one, only to meet another bearing the same shape, same speed, same name format within a week. U-boat commander Günther Prien had once written that the sea was the last pure battlefield, By 1943, that purity was gone. The Americans had industrialized it. Where Germany crafted ships like weapons, the United States produced them like bullets. The Allied convoy routes across the Atlantic, codenamed HX, SC, ON, and ONS, were increasingly composed of Liberty ships. They carried oil, grain, and munitions to Britain, and from there to North Africa and Italy. The more the Germans sank, the more appeared. By the summer of 1943, British and American forces were landing tanks, trucks, and artillery faster than U-boats could stop them. Inside the U-boats, tension grew unbearable. Each patrol became longer, more dangerous. Radar-equipped aircraft hunted them from above, destroyers from below, and Liberty convoys filled the spaces in between. What frightened the German officers most was not the individual ship's strength, but the industrial rhythm behind them. It was like fighting a factory. They began to realize the grim truth. The Atlantic War was no longer about tactics. It was about tonnage. And the Allies could replace tonnage faster than Germany could sink it. Back in America, workers in hard hats and bandanas sang while they welded. Shipyard cafeterias served thousands of meals per shift. Posters read, "A ship a day keeps Hitler away." Entire cities were built around this war effort: Richmond, Portland, Baltimore, Brunswick. Women known as Rosies learned to weld hull seams, while African-American laborers operated cranes and hauled steel plates. Many had never seen the ocean until they built a ship that would cross it. Every keel laid was an act of defiance against tyranny. To German engineers, the report seemed unreal. They studied fragments of Liberty ships recovered from wreckage, noting their crude welding seams, their lack of polish. "These are not ships," one report remarked. "They are steel boxes that somehow float." Yet that was their genius. They were designed not for beauty or longevity, but for victory through volume. The philosophy was pure arithmetic. If one can be built faster than one can be destroyed, the enemy's power collapses under mathematics alone. By the end of 1943, the tide of war in the Atlantic had turned. The wolf packs that once roamed freely now faced death at every turn. German radio traffic became desperate. "We are surrounded by escorts. Too many ships." Convoy after convoy reached Britain intact, carrying the lifeblood of the Allied war machine. And still, from the shipyards, more Liberty ships rolled out: SS John W. Brown, SS Jeremiah O'Brien, SS Richard Montgomery, each one named after a figure of American freedom, each one a floating declaration that tyranny could be buried under steel and resolve. In the grey waters of the North Atlantic, Capitan Thurman surfaced after a failed attack. Through his binoculars, he watched the convoy sail on unbroken. The Liberty ships moved steadily, black smoke trailing across the dawn. His chief engineer muttered bitterly, "It's like they can build the ocean itself." Thurman didn't reply. Somewhere deep inside he understood Germany's U-boat campaign was dying. Not from lack of courage, but from lack of industry. As he descended back into the conning tower, a sonar ping echoed across the water. Depth charges were being dropped. The sea exploded in light and thunder. The U-boat dove for safety, chased by the very ships it had once hunted. In that darkness, the realization was clear. These Liberty ships were not just cargo vessels. They were symbols of an unstoppable nation that had learned to mass-produce victory. And yet, beneath that triumph lay a secret even more astonishing, one that would soon change the entire tempo of the Atlantic War forever. The Germans would discover it too late, when the true engine behind America's miracle was finally revealed. The secret was not just steel or speed. It was the rhythm of industry itself. America had learned to wage war like a factory. In 1941, Henry J. Kaiser, the man once known for building dams, turned his attention to shipbuilding. He saw shipyards not as docks, but as vast production lines, where ships could move from blueprint to sea in weeks. He brought engineers from Detroit, men who had spent their careers perfecting the assembly line. They studied the blueprints of the Liberty ship, simplified every joint, and redesigned the workflow so that one section could be built while another was still being welded. When Kaiser first proposed welding instead of riveting, traditional shipbuilders laughed. It was too new, too risky. But welding saved time, weight, and manpower. By 1943, over 2,000 Liberty ships were under construction at once. From Portland to Mobile, from Baltimore to Richmond, the clang of steel echoed day and night. The American welding torches burned like stars across the coasts. Workers divided the ship into prefabricated blocks: keel, hull, deck, engine housing, superstructure, each built in separate yards, then shipped by rail to assembly sites. The Liberty's hull plates were standardized to such a degree that one yard's panels could fit another's perfectly. The entire nation became a single shipyard. At the heart of the miracle lay a new workforce. 500,000 shipbuilders, many of them women, had stepped out of homes and farms into the firelit world of welding arcs and cranes. They worked 12-hour shifts, driven by the promise that every ship they built could save lives across the Atlantic. In cafeterias, posters declared, "Build ships, beat Hitler." In the dry docks, sparks fell like comets as welders traced seams in the cold dawn. Many had never seen the ocean, yet they were crafting vessels that would cross it carrying freedom itself. What made it more incredible was that the Liberty ship's design had been deliberately stripped of complexity. It was a machine built for multiplication. The engines were old triple-expansion steam types, reliable but simple, chosen because America could produce them in thousands. The steel was standardized, the parts interchangeable. If a shipyard lacked one component, another could supply it overnight by train. Where the Germans built precision, the Americans built abundance. It was the first time in history that logistics had become a weapon as lethal as any torpedo. Deep beneath the Atlantic, U-boat commanders began to feel it. The rhythm of convoys changed. In 1942, a single sinking could cripple supply lines. By late 1943, even after a successful attack, the lines never broke. The replacements arrived too fast. Captain Lieutenant Hans Werner of U-230 recorded in his patrol log that ships appear in endless rows, each one the same profile, same cargo, same flag. It is like the ocean itself is manufacturing them. He didn't know it, but that was true. Each Liberty ship carried 10,000 tons of cargo, everything from Sherman tanks to canned peaches, from P-47 wings to penicillin. Onboard cranes made loading faster. In total, the Liberty fleet would deliver more than 75% of all supplies reaching Allied fronts. They carried oil to the RAF, rations to Russia, and fuel to the invasion beaches of Italy. The German High Command realized that to win the Atlantic, they would have to sink faster than the Americans could build. They never could. Meanwhile, American shipyards became laboratories of efficiency. Engineers monitored how long each process took: cutting, welding, fitting, painting, and then shortened it. Conveyor systems moved plates directly from cutting sheds to dry docks. Prefabrication reached its zenith when Kaiser's Yard No. 2 produced a Liberty ship every 2 days. The miracle was not just production, it was coordination. Shipbuilding became choreography, and every welder, every riveter, every crane operator knew their part. Across the ocean, German intelligence analysts read Allied press releases with disbelief. "Impossible," they wrote. They dispatched spies to American ports, only to report back that the ships were real and still multiplying. U-boat crews began to nickname them Der Strom der Freiheit, the Stream of Liberty. By 1944, it had become a flood. Every Atlantic convoy resembled a steel city moving across the waves, escorted by corvettes and destroyers. The submarines that once ruled the deep now fought to survive against radar. Sonar and relentless air patrols launched from escort carriers carried, ironically, by Liberty ships themselves. The decisive test came with the convoys supplying Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. Liberty ships carried tanks, landing craft, trucks, munitions, fuel, even prefabricated harbor sections called mulberries. The success of D-Day depended on them. As the Allies crossed the Channel in June 1944, Liberty ships poured through the English ports, unloading at a pace no enemy could match. In 1 week, over 326,000 men, 50,000 vehicles, and 500,000 tons of supplies reached the beaches. German officers couldn't comprehend how such a vast army could be sustained across the sea. The answer was simple: industrial repetition. While U-boats prowled, trying desperately to strike the supply lines, they found themselves overwhelmed by numbers. Destroyer escorts equipped with radar and sonar hunted them relentlessly. Aircraft from escort carriers scoured the waves. The Liberty ships, slow and steady, pressed forward under constant guard. Even when struck, many survived long enough to be repaired. Welded seams made hull damage easier to patch, and damaged vessels were towed to the floating dry docks of Iceland or the Azores. By late 1944, U-boat captains began to dread the convoys. For every torpedo they fired, for every ship that went under, dozens more took its place. The mathematics were merciless. Between 1941 and 1945, 2,710 Liberty ships were built, an average of 3 every day. Over 200 shipyards and subcontractors had participated. The Liberty ship was no longer just a vessel. It was the heartbeat of an empire of production. German engineers studied captured blueprints and were horrified by their simplicity. No secret alloys, no exotic engines, just standardized steel, careful design, and speed. "They have made shipbuilding into printing," one officer reportedly said. "They press them like paper." The Reich could not respond. German industry was collapsing under Allied bombing. Shipyards were in ruins, materials scarce. For every U-boat built, 10 Liberty ships joined the sea lanes. Meanwhile, in America, workers celebrated each launch with pride. Brass bands played as ships slid into the water. Champagne bottles cracked against hulls and families cheered. These were not symbols of glory. They were tools of survival. When a Liberty ship was lost, its name was crossed off a board and a new one began the next day. The process never stopped. It became almost mechanical, a living machine powered by the will of a nation that refused to slow down. As 1945 approached, the Atlantic War had become a contest of endurance. Germany's submarines had sunk nearly 3,000 Allied ships, but it no longer mattered. The Liberty fleet grew faster than destruction could catch it. When U-boat crews surfaced, they often found the horizon dotted with the silhouettes of more freighters than they could count. "It is hopeless," one German radio message said. "They are too many." The realization spread through the Kriegsmarine like a fever. The war at sea was lost not in battle, but in the factories of America. Liberty ships had transformed the ocean itself into a production line of victory. Behind every convoy was the strength of millions of hands, thousands of cranes, and a single unbreakable idea. Quantity has its own kind of quality. As the Allied convoys rolled eastward through sleet and storm, each ship seemed to hum with the same defiance. The Liberty fleet had become more than steel. It was the physical manifestation of democracy's will to endure. And soon, in the closing months of the war, German officers would come face to face with the terrifying truth. These ships were only the beginning. America had learned to build faster than the world could destroy. When the war finally began to tilt against Germany, the men of the Kriegsmarine understood it first. By 1944, the once formidable U-boat fleet was being hunted across every ocean. Convoy after convoy pressed forward, each wave of Liberty ships carrying the materials of defeat to the Axis. Radar, sonar, depth charges, long-range patrols all played their part. But it was the sheer, crushing momentum of industrial will that broke them. In the North Atlantic, a new kind of thunder rolled. Not from storms or explosions, but from the endless passage of American cargo hulls slicing through the swells. Each one bore a white star, a name of a statesman or poet, and a cargo hold filled with the instruments of history. The psychological weight on German commanders was immense. U-boat crews, once celebrated as knights of the deep, were now fugitives, pursued by destroyers whose fuel and ammunition had arrived aboard the very ships they failed to stop. The men in the conning towers began to see the Liberty ship as an apparition of inevitability, each one slow, clumsy, and yet impossible to halt. Captains recorded their disbelief in war diaries. "We have sunk 2, one noted, but their replacements have already appeared on the horizon." Others described the eerie calm of convoys gliding onward after attacks, like a herd immune to pain. The sea, once Germany's hunting ground, had turned against its predators. On the surface, Allied naval planners watched the transformation with awe. The Liberty fleet had become a living artery, pulsing with the lifeblood of war. Every day, 15,000 tons of supplies crossed the Atlantic. The ports of Liverpool, Belfast, and Glasgow thundered with cranes and cargo nets. In 1 week alone, a single Liberty ship could deliver enough material to arm an entire infantry division. Without them, the invasion of Europe would have been impossible. They were the invisible soldiers, the floating backbone of strategy. Inside each hull, simple machinery worked with the rhythm of endurance. The old triple-expansion steam engines, once derided as obsolete, proved indestructible. Crews learned to repair them mid-voyage. patching valves and replacing pistons with makeshift tools. The welded seams that engineers once feared turned out to be easier to fix than riveted joints. Ships returned to service within weeks after torpedo damage. In shipyards from New York to San Francisco, repair docks became extensions of the front line. The cycle of destruction and rebirth never stopped. For the men and women who built them, the Liberty ships were symbols of purpose. In Richmond, welders signed their initials inside bulkheads before they were sealed. In Baltimore, children waved flags as new ships slid into the water under clouds of steam. By the end of the war, more than 700,000 workers had contributed to the fleet. Each launch was both celebration and farewell. The workers knew their ships might never return, yet they built them with the same pride every time. "We send them out like suns," one shipfitter said. "And if they don't come back, we build another." The industrial miracle echoed through the enemy's despair. In captured German records, engineers admitted defeat. "We cannot match their production," one report concluded. They have found a way to make war endless. The once revered German precision, the craftsmanship of the U-boats, the efficiency of their machinery, was useless against a storm of steel that never ceased. Each Liberty ship that reached port extended the war for the Allies, and each one lost was instantly replaced. For Germany, it was like fighting a shadow that multiplied when struck. Even Adolf Hitler took notice. Reports from the Naval Command described the unrelenting stream of American supply ships as one of the primary reasons for the Reich's logistical collapse. In the final months of the war, as Allied forces advanced on all fronts, it was the cargo delivered by those ships that kept the engines of liberation turning. Fuel for Patton's tanks, shells for the artillery at Arnhem, bread for the civilians of liberated France. Without the Liberty fleet, victory would have starved before it marched. When the war ended in May 1945, the Atlantic was still thick with them. Thousands of Liberty ships steamed under clear skies, their decks rusted from salt and strain, their engines tired but still beating. They had crossed oceans under fire, through fog and ice, through the burning wreckage of comrades. Some bore scars from near misses, patched holes visible like wounds stitched shut. Crews painted them with pride. Each dent was proof of survival. In the ports of Britain, sailors walked down gangways knowing they had served aboard something larger than a vessel. They had been part of an idea, that a free nation could manufacture strength faster than tyranny could destroy it. In America, workers returned home to quiet towns, their wartime jobs complete, their legacy floating on every tide. Many Liberty ships were sold, scrapped, or repurposed, but a few, like the Jeremiah O'Brien and the John W. Brown, survive even now, rusted but proud, monuments to the day when welders and dreamers built an army of steel. The psychological legacy of those ships lingered long after the guns fell silent. They changed the definition of warfare itself. No longer could nations rely on elite craftsmanship alone. Victory now belonged to those who could build, rebuild, and outproduce. The Liberty ship became the symbol of modern logistics, the idea that supply chains could be as decisive as armies. Military historians would later call it industrial warfare. But to the men who fought beneath those grey skies, it was something simpler, endurance made visible. In post-war Germany, captured naval officers studied Allied production statistics and could only shake their heads. "We thought courage and skill would prevail," one admitted years later, "but they built faster than we could sink." The lesson reshaped the next generation of warfare. During the Cold War, both East and West adopted the philosophy born in those shipyards. That mass production, not just innovation, determined survival. The assembly lines that built Liberty ships became the blueprint for every logistical empire that followed. Even decades later, when one of the last surviving Liberty ships fired up its engines for a commemorative voyage, the sound echoed like a heartbeat from another century. The pistons groaned, the propeller churned, and grey smoke curled into the wind. On the dock, veterans saluted, their faces lit by the reflection of the same steel they had once trusted with their lives. For them, it wasn't just a relic. It was proof that courage could be built, welded, and launched by human hands. The Liberty ship had begun as a desperate experiment, dismissed as crude and temporary. It ended as a symbol of endurance so profound that even the enemy came to respect it. German engineers, who once mocked its simplicity, later studied its production methods in post-war reconstruction. They called it the miracle of repetition. What they had failed to sink, they now sought to emulate. In the final reckoning, it wasn't a weapon that turned the tide, it was a process. The Liberty ship proved that power lay not in perfection, but in persistence. It embodied the belief that the strength of a free people could be measured not by how finely they built, but by how endlessly they tried. And as the last of those ships faded from the sea, their story remained etched in history's wake, a fleet born of necessity, sustained by will and victorious through sheer volume. For the men who faced them through periscopes in the frozen Atlantic, they were a nightmare of steel. For those who built them, they were a promise kept. In the end, they carried more than cargo. They carried the proof that freedom could be forged in factories and floated across oceans, that liberty, once built, could never truly be sunk.